You're listening to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast, episode 183. Welcome to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. I'm your host, Paula Price, lawyer turned certified executive coach. This podcast was created to empower women lawyers just like you to create a life and practice you love. Join me every week for a break from the hustle so we can focus on you, what you truly want, and how you can create it. If you're over the overwhelm, done with putting out fires, and ready to redefine success on your own terms, you're in the right place. Ready for today's episode? Let's dive in. What does it take to be a successful lateral hire? Whether you are leaving one law firm to go to another law firm or one organization to another, chances are you have questions about how you can effectively hit the ground running. If this is you, you are absolutely in the right place, and I'm thrilled to have you here joining me for today's podcast episode. If you're not in the middle of a lateral transition, I would encourage you to stay on anyways, because what we talk about today might help you think about how you can refresh your approach in your current role. And also, if you're thinking about making a lateral move, this might help you set yourself up for success in your anticipated transition. Now, before we dive into the meat of today's episode, I wanted to let you know about a couple of opportunities that are coming up for us to work together in a workshop capacity. If you're listening to this podcast episode when it goes live, which is sort of mid-late November 2024, I have a couple of trainings coming up in December, and I'd love you to just hold the date for now. One of them will be on Friday, December 6th at noon Pacific time, and I'm going to talk about women in leadership. So that's noon Pacific time on Friday, December 6th. And I'll be offering another workshop on Thursday, December 19th, also at noon Pacific time. And this workshop is going to be all about setting yourself up for success in the new year. So that's 2025. Now, I will be sending out more information later. So if you would like me to send you that information, send me a note and I'll make sure that it comes your way. I will also be setting up the links and registration information in the weeks to come. So you will certainly hear of that as well. What I'm also going to be offering, and this is more of a long-term thing, is a program starting in January for a group of women lawyers who are interested in working on their leadership skills and their goals for the new year. It is a program that I've been running for the past 2 years. I just love the program and the women who have joined me for these programs. And so if this is something that's of interest to you, let me know. I will absolutely be sharing more information in the weeks to come. But if you already know you're interested, let me know, because I do cap the group at 8 women. And so if you want to be one of those women, then let me know in advance. So with that being said, let's talk about lateral transitions, lateral hires, and what it takes to succeed at a new law firm. Now, there are a number of different ways you might move laterally. For example, if you're going from one organization that is not a law firm to another organization that is not a law firm. And so much of this discussion would apply to you, but who I'm really thinking about in today's episode is the lawyer who goes from law firm A to law firm B, because that type of lateral transition has its unique set of challenges. And so that's really what I'm going to be speaking to here today. Now, if you are someone who is making a lateral transition, you've already made the decision that you're moving from law firm A to law firm B, then you're in it. You're probably already thinking about what it is that you want to accomplish and how you want to effectively hit the ground running. Now, when you make this transition, chances are you're seeing a lot of opportunity, right? There's a reason why you left your current or soon to be former role, right? Maybe there was a lack of opportunity where you were, right? There was a limit, a ceiling on how far you could go. It may be that the type of work that you were getting exposed to wasn't aligned with your long-term goals. I know this has happened to me when I used to practice. There was a time where I practiced at a firm where I really loved the firm. I loved the people. However, the substantive area of law wasn't what I wanted to be doing for the long run. And so I knew that for me, I needed to lateral from one firm to another so that I would have different opportunities to work in a different practice area. So that might resonate with you. Now, it might also be that you are quite happy with the practice area, but there's something about your current firm or your former firm that wasn't really working for you, right? Sometimes it's a cultural clash, right? Maybe it's a lifestyle clash. There's an expectations. There's just an ill fit of personality. It might be that you're not getting the opportunities. Other people are getting those opportunities and you're not. It may be that there are some issues that have kind of bubbled to the surface, right? Sometimes it's that you feel like you're really burning out and there's no way for you to fix that where you are. You might find that it's almost just uncomfortable to be in that environment. And so you have found something new where you expect and hope that it's going to be better. And so if that is you, if you're transitioning and you're thinking, okay, this is a new opportunity for me to be in an environment where I'll have a fresh start, there will be more opportunities. I will be able to set myself up with a practice in a way that really aligns with what I want for my career and for my personal life. There's a lot of promise there, right? So you might be really excited about that and looking forward to that in your new role. Now, on the other hand, as you step in as a lateral, there are two distinct challenges that you will be facing. Number one is integrating, right? If you go from firm A to firm B and you've got a few years under your belt, that's wonderful news because you've got a bunch of experience that is now behind you, right? If you think about where you were when you started your current job or the job that you just left, right? Maybe you were a baby lawyer, maybe you were fresh out of law school, you really didn't know what you were doing. And so the learning curve was extremely steep. And now you've built up your skills to a certain level, wherever it is that you are now. So you've got those skills to back you up, but you're moving into an environment where potentially there are a number of other lawyers who are also at your level who maybe have been at the firm for a longer period of time. And so you're having to lateral into a group or a department where you are now at the same level as lawyers who've been there for longer. So that can present some specific challenges or unique challenges to figuring out what your place is in that new environment. Now, when you are going from firm A to firm B, you're also stepping into a brand new culture, right? So the culture that you left may be the devil that you know, and now you're stepping into the devil that you don't know. Not to say that it's always going to be a devil, but the reality is even the most amazing jobs are going to have challenges. And so you're going to be trading in the current challenges or the former challenges for a brand new set of challenges. And so there's going to be this period where you need to, first of all, understand what those challenges are, and then figure out how to overcome them, how to exist within that new system. So you'll have a cultural shift. You'll have a lot of new personalities that you'll need to integrate with. You'll have new systems, right? Every firm is going to have its own set of systems, whether it's the email software that they're using, the way that you're storing documents, the way that you manage files. If you're in litigation, the litigation software that you're using to manage your files. If you are a deal lawyer, maybe it's the due diligence and document platforms. There are all sorts of new technical systems, software, programs, ways of doing things that will be new to you. So on top of integrating into a new environment, you're going to have all of these new systems. And substantively, you may also be on a fresh learning curve, right? If you're stepping into a practice area that is different from what you're used to, or similar, but yet in some ways different, or even if it's just the practice style that is different, all of a sudden you are going to be integrating into an environment where things are done a certain way, and all of that is new to you, right? It's not new to them, it's new to you. And because you have experience under your belt, sometimes the expectations might be that you're already at a certain level, and yet you're not necessarily there. So that's one set of challenges, the challenges that come from you integrating into a new environment. The other set of challenges are more personal challenges. What I have noticed and experienced myself is that no matter where you are going to find that there are certain things that you do that are problematic. And this is not meant to be me being critical of anybody who is listening to this podcast. It is simply a fact of life, right? When you start out in firm A, you're going to potentially, and I think very likely, make some mistakes. You might establish relationships in a way that you don't like, right? I remember when I was younger, I was an au pair in Switzerland for a year, and I was trying to learn how to speak French. And the woman that I was working for, she said to me one day, the language that you start speaking with somebody is the language that you continue to speak with somebody. right? And so if you think about that in the context of your jobs, the way that you first engage with somebody very likely will set up the tone of the relationship that you'll have with that person. So if you're leaving one organization, you might do an audit or a reflection on some of the relationships that you set up. And you might see how there are some patterns that you've set up that you don't particularly like. So as you're transitioning, as you're moving in as a lateral hire, you want to be thinking about what you're bringing with you and being aware of maybe some of the habits or patterns that you don't want to bring with you. So that could be boundaries that you're setting up or not setting up. If you have a tendency to burn yourself out, right? If you take on more than is comfortable for you, there may be a reason for that beyond the environment that you were in. So you want to watch for that. If you had a practice that felt very disorganized, if you struggled with time management, that might be something that you will bring with you. If you found that you burned bridges, this happens sometimes where you burn bridges with the lawyers, the colleagues that you have, you burn through your internal market and sometimes your external market for your work. If that's happening, then you'll want to pay attention. And it may also be that you feel a loss of confidence, right? If you're in an environment where these things are happening, right? Where you don't have your boundaries in place, you're starting to burn out, the quality of your work is starting to suffer, your relationships start to suffer, you may start to see yourself in a more negative light. It can impact your feelings of self-confidence. It can trigger that feeling of being an imposter, all of those things. And so before you set foot in your new firm, you want to have a bit of reflection, right? You want to check in with yourself and ask yourself whether there are any habits or patterns that you've established that you want to move away from in your new role. So again, going back to where you're at, whether you're about to transition, you have already transitioned, you're in the early stages, or you're thinking about a transition, or you're in your role and you're thinking, how do I jumpstart myself? These are some of the things that you might be thinking about, right? How are you integrating into the environment and what are you bringing with you into that environment? So the task here is to have a strategy, right? We don't want to assume that simply because we're going from job A to job B that things are going to be different and our problems are going to be solved. And I know that that's not how you're thinking, but how do we strategize? How do we set ourselves up for success? Now, a fresh start, as you know, isn't the only thing that is required, right? It is not the only thing that is required to guarantee success for a lateral transition. Now, there are a number of reasons for that. First of all, wherever it is that you're going, whatever law firm that you choose, chances are people there are going to be busy and they will not have enough time to walk you step by step into your transition, into how things work, into how to thrive within the organization. They may have the absolute best of intentions, but my guess is that no matter what they set up for you, no matter how much they try to welcome you, no matter how much they try to ease you into that transition, they are still going to be busy. And if you rely solely on that, you may find that it's not enough to really get you from point A to point B in the way that you want. Now, as I mentioned earlier, even the most amazing jobs are going to have their challenges. There are going to be the parts of the job that you don't particularly like doing. There are going to be people who you may find more difficult to work with than others. And so you want to expect that there are going to be challenges, right? When you are going through the interviewing phase and everything seemed perfect and rosy and you met lawyers who you saw yourself working with and you thought this is going to be amazing, also be prepared that there are going to be parts of that job that you may not particularly love. And so you want to be prepared for that as those parts that may be less ideal reveal themselves to you. Now, you may also be expected to hit the ground running. And as I mentioned earlier as well, right? You may be assumed to have skills that you don't yet have. Now, those may be substantive skills, practice skills, things that people assume that you have already done that you have not yet done. It could also be practice styles. And I see this with a number of lawyers who go from one firm to another firm, where firm A has a certain style of practice. Maybe it's more casual. Maybe you have more responsibility or less responsibility. And then you move into a new role and the style is different. And so you can find that there may be some bumps along the road as you're adapting to these expectations that your new firm has of you. And as I mentioned before, also, you want to be aware of the habits or practices or the personal challenges that you're having or had in your past role that you may be bringing with you. So things like boundaries, time management, dealing with difficult people or personalities, managing your stress, maintaining your confidence, and creating a robust market for your work. So these are some of the challenges and some of the reasons why you want to have that strategy in place. And also, you want to have a strategy because this is a fresh opportunity. This is an opportunity for you to reset your practice and be really intentional about how you set yourself up, right? With the benefit of the years of experience under your belt, with the benefit of more clarity over where you want your career to go, with the benefit of having made some mistakes, right? And learned a few things. This is an opportunity for you to start fresh and to be intentional in the way that you approach your new role. So what I recommend doing here is to follow 4 steps when it comes to transitioning. And I'm going to share those steps with you here. The first of those steps is I would invite you to take 100% responsibility for your transition. Now, wherever it is that you go, they will make efforts to welcome you. They will make efforts to integrate you. And depending on the firm, depending on the culture, they may make a lot of effort. There may be a lunch, there may be training, there may be mentors assigned, there may be all sorts of bells and whistles to bring you up to speed. Or it may be at the other end of the spectrum, right? You're here, great, here's a few files. You can figure this out. If you have questions, come see me, right? It can be anywhere in between. And what I invite you to do is to take 100% responsibility for your integration into the firm. I would invite you to learn everything that you can about who's who in the zoo, how the firm operates, and what you need to do to set yourself up for success at the firm. Now, I always think it's helpful to simplify things, especially when you're looking at something that could be as daunting, right, as the task of succeed at your new firm, right? What does that mean exactly, right? How do you break that down into smaller pieces? I would encourage you to think of 3 different areas where you can effectively focus your attention in order to succeed. The first, and I'll share those with you, and then I'll go into a little bit more detail. One is relationships, one is practice management, and one is skills development. So these are 3 practice focus areas that I often discuss with clients because I think if you can cover those 3 bases, then you're always going to be able to have a plan and a strategy that is going to set yourself up to thrive. So relationships, I would put that first. If you are integrating into a new environment, I would 100% recommend starting with who is who in the zoo and figuring out what relationships you need to build, who you need to meet, who you need to introduce yourself to, who you need to do work for, who you need to please in order to set yourself up for success within your new organization. Relationships are going to determine the work that comes your way. So you want to think about who in the organization would you like to work with? Who do you anticipate working with? This may already be clear to you based on the interview process that you went through. It may not be as clear. So again, learning about your organization and who does what type of work, and then seeking out relationships with people who do the kind of work that you want is going to be a top priority for you. It's also going to help with your integration, right? Even if somebody isn't necessarily somebody that you would work for or work with or do substantive projects with, there may be people who you want to establish relationships with simply for that purpose of integration. And then finally, community, right? You know that if you're in an environment where you've got lots of people who you feel support you, who know you, who you say hi to when you physically enter the office, that is great, right? That gives you a certain sense of well-being, of community, of safety that will support you as you move forward. The second area where I'd encourage you to be strategic and to make a plan is practice management, right? This is how you manage your practice. This is how you manage your time. Are you meeting deadlines? Are you following through on the things that you say you're going to follow through on? Are you communicating proactively with the lawyers that you're working with? And I get it. This can be really hard, especially if you're brand new and everybody is new to you. You may feel a little bit sheepish or reluctant to communicate as much as maybe you should be communicating. And so I would encourage you to err on the side of being communicative, being responsive, and making sure that you do things when you say you're going to do them. Now, time management, following through on deadlines, establishing clear lines of communication, all of that, those are things that are relatively easily done, right? In a sense, I mean, it can be challenging if you've got multiple deadlines, but typically you can organize yourself in order to do these things, communicate, meet deadlines, and it automatically will establish trust with people around you. And the converse is that it's very easy to lose trust where you're not necessarily following through on communication and deadlines. And so this is why I think it's really important, after that first bucket, right, where you're looking at your relationships, you're meeting people, is to make sure that you are interacting with people in a way that they feel like they can trust you right out of the gates, right? It's a lot easier to build and establish that trust with somebody than it is to make up that trust if for whatever reason you don't miss a deadline or they thought that you were working on something, there was not a ton of communication and they felt a little bit lost. It's a lot easier to set the trust up in the first place than it is to recover that trust if you have lost it. And the last thing I'd like to say here is that when you're stepping into a new firm, right, a new job, it's a lot easier to set your systems up at that point. So you might reflect on the systems that you had at your former firm, in your former role, what was working, what wasn't working, and then design your new system proactively so that you hit the ground running, so that you feel confident about your systems, so that you're not dealing with sort of these scraggly loose ends that you may have been dealing with at your old firm. And then finally, the third area is skills development. As a practitioner, you will always be reaching for new opportunities. You will be developing your substantive skills, perhaps in new practice areas, the level of responsibility that you're taking on in each of your roles, on files, on projects, on trials, on closings, on whatever substantive matter you happen to be working on. And so you want to be growing in that area too. So I put that one last because it's not that it's less important, because you do want to demonstrate your capacity and your skills. But in terms of sequencing, you need to meet the people to have the work flow your way. Once the work is flowing your way, you want to make sure that you are meeting the practice requirements, that you're meeting deadlines, you're establishing that baseline level of trust. And then finally, with the work that you're doing, you want to be focusing on making that work the best quality work that you're capable of producing, right? You want to make that great first impression, which leads us to point 2. So point 1 was take 100% responsibility and focus on those 3 areas of your practice: relationships, practice management, and skills. Then step 2, you want to make a strong first impression. So anytime you go into a new role, a new environment, you are forming a first impression. And there was this commercial in the 1980s, I believe it was. I'm pretty sure it was a Head & Shoulders commercial because I looked it up before recording this episode. And the tagline was, "You never get a second chance to make a first impression." So that kind of stuck with me. And that's kind of how it is for you, right? As a lateral, you are making a first impression. You don't get to make that first impression twice. So what does that mean? It does mean that there's a certain amount of pressure to establish yourself, right? In a way that people will think of you and refer work to you and trust you and want to work with you and see you as part of the team. So you might prepare yourself energetically for that challenge, right? In your first few weeks, months of practicing in a new environment, there will be that additional pressure of making a good first impression day after day, potentially for a number of days. So what do you want to do? You want to play the part, right? You want to show up and be ready to engage, ready to work. You want to be present in the office, right? If you're in a situation where you've got the option of working remotely or within the walls of your office, I highly recommend spending as much time as you can manage within the firm itself. This makes a big difference. It is something that I often hear management encourage lawyers to do: be more present in the office. I 100% understand why it can be beneficial to work from home instead of at the office. I work from home. I've got young kids at home. Well, I guess they're not that young anymore. They're 10 and 12. But there are major advantages to me to work in an environment where I'm not required to go downtown into an office. But for the purpose of integration, I would encourage you to dial that up as much as is manageable for you, because you will meet people faster, you will be exposed to more organic conversations, more organic opportunities. You'll be able to show your interest, right? Talking about that first impression. So you might give yourself a window of time where you're really going to dial that up in order to integrate more effectively. And maybe after a few weeks, after a few months, you might be a little bit more strategic about when you're working from home versus being in the office. But if you can swing it, I highly recommend being physically present in order to make that first impression with as many people as you can within the office. I also encourage you to show up with that helpful mindset, right? It might be that at the beginning, you're not doing the most challenging work. It doesn't matter. You just want to associate yourself with quality, with responsiveness, with somebody that people can turn to that will get the job done. So deliver on all the wins that you possibly can. Show yourself as helpful, show yourself as efficient, productive, all of those things. That is going to set the tone for you. Now, I would also invite you to expect that things are not always going to go perfectly. If you make a mistake, if something doesn't go 100% perfectly, that's okay. You can expect that that is going to happen. What is most important here is not so much that you avoid having that happen in the first place, although if you can avoid it, great. But if it happens, that's fine. What you then want to demonstrate is that you are responsive and willing to take steps to fix things, right? Maybe it's a time management question where something wasn't delivered on time. And so then you show how you are responding to that. You are creating systems to address that proactively. If there is, something that happened where there was a miscommunication, then you're taking proactive steps to fix it. So you just want to show that you are capable of receiving constructive feedback and then acting on it. That's your main skill that you are going to demonstrate in that situation. So going back to the steps, the suggestions for succeeding as a lateral, I mentioned earlier, there's 4 of them. The first is you want to take 100% responsibility for the process. Step 2, make a strong first impression. Step 3, I would invite you to make a plan for your first 30, 60, and 90 days in your new role. Now, I say this not because I expect you to follow your plan to a T. Not at all. I say this because I would love you to go through that mental exercise of thinking about what you might focus on in your first month, in your first 60 days, in your first quarter. And all this does is it will highlight for you some of the things that you might be looking for, seeking out, trying to get involved in, and it will give you some measure of assessing your own level of success. That's the only reason that I want you to do this. It gives you a guide that can be really helpful, especially if you don't have someone else telling you, hey, this is what we want from you in the first 30, 60, 90 days, right? Do that for yourself. So how do you want to set up a plan? Well, first of all, you can think of the 3 different buckets that I just shared with you, right? What are the relationships that you want to build? What are the practice management skills you want to establish? And what are the substantive legal skills? What are the opportunities that you want to create for yourself? And you can do this work on your own. You can think about what would fall into each of those buckets. You can also ask ChatGPT or some other AI intelligence process to generate a plan for you. And I've used ChatGPT for this type of thing, and it will very happily and easily produce a list of things to do. You will want to take that list and be very discerning about what you would actually put on your plan. Again, the idea here isn't to have the perfect plan. It's to be thinking about the plan. It's to be planning proactively, giving some thought to what you want to do. And you will then take your plan, maybe identify a few bullet points for each of those segments, the 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. You just want to have a guideline for yourself so that you know what you're supposed to do. And you might also talk with somebody at the firm, right? You might create a plan. You might talk to a mentor about it and just say, listen, I'm thinking about some of the things that I want to do to better integrate into the firm. Here's what I'm thinking. Depending on the level of conversation, it might be more casual. So you might not tell them, I've got a 30, 60, 90 day plan, or it may be that type of conversation where it would make sense to be that particular about it. You need to gauge what that relationship is like, what the discussion could look like. But what you might be doing here is getting a bit of buy-in, right? Here's the way that I propose to integrate. Hey, do you have any suggestions on ways that I could integrate more into the group, into the firm, things that I might be thinking about? You've seen other lawyers who've successfully lateraled into the firm. What have they done? So again, you just want to make sure that whatever it is that you're thinking about for your plan, that you start to implement. And what I'd also encourage you to do is think about what criteria are being evaluated. So if you are in a role where you will have performance reviews, I would encourage you to ask around, figure out what performance reviews are all about. What is being evaluated? How do they work? How are they going to know what type of work you've been doing? Typically, you will send a list of files that you've worked on with various lawyers at the firm, and then your review will happen that way. So this kind of depends on the level that you're at and the organization that you join, but understand what metrics are being evaluated, right? There will likely be billable hours that you're expected to meet. There may be non-billable targets that you're expected to meet. There may be learning milestones that you are expected to meet. So figure out what all of that is so that you are able to meet the standards, right? The standards that you set for yourself, the standards that the firm has set for you. And if you want some ideas about how to succeed, how to prepare for a performance review, a recent episode that I produced, I think it's a couple of episodes ago, has a whole discussion about how you can do that. So I'd encourage you to go back and listen to that. Even if your review isn't for another 6 months or a year, having it in focus year round is the first tip that I offer. And so I would encourage you to think about that, right? How are you being evaluated, and how can you start satisfying and showing and fulfilling those expectations from the very beginning? So that was step 3, was to create a plan, 30, 60, 90 days. Now you can obviously go beyond that if you want, but the idea here is just to get into that mindset of being intentional and planning. Now, the 4th suggestion is to get the support that you need. So if you are starting in a new environment, chances are you will at some point find yourself feeling a little bit like you've lost your footing. And I would encourage you not to wait until you are floundering before you reach out to get support. Now, you can get support within the organization itself, right? If there is somebody who is dedicated to professional development, they would probably be your first stop, right? Talk to them about how you're integrating, any support that you think that you might need, any challenges that you're having, whether it's challenges getting work or figuring out how to use systems or your assistant or your team or whatever. So there are internal sources. You might have a mentor that you can go to. There might be another lawyer that you feel comfortable talking to about your transition, maybe asking them questions. And so internally, there are very likely some ways for you to support yourself as you integrate into the firm. And I'd also encourage you to have people outside of the firm who support you. So that might be other mentors that you have, people who've kind of nurtured you over the course of your career. It could be your friends and family. It's always great to have that kind of support. And also, who are the professionals in your corner? So as a coach, I strongly believe that coaching can be a wonderful resource, an impartial person who can help you navigate the challenges that you're having when it comes to integration. So whether it would be planning for your 30, 60, 90-day integration, whether it's planning around some of those internal challenges that we talked about earlier, right? If you know that you have a tendency to overwork, then you might work with a coach to help with boundary setting. If you know that you have trouble managing stress, that might be another area where you're speaking to your coach. If you're wanting to be really strategic, you might bring a coach into those conversations, right? What are the major levers that you can pull today in order to set yourself up for success in the future? Sometimes it's practice management, right? You're going in, you want to make sure that your systems are up to snuff, right? So you may want to work with a coach to figure out how to set up your systems, your time management, so that you're hitting the ground running, you're delivering on time, you're communicating effectively. People feel like they can trust you and they trust you right off the bat. It may also be that you have challenges with perfectionism, right? How do you deal with that perfectionism? These are all areas where a coach can help you. And there's also overlap where a counselor might be really helpful for you in addition to or instead of a coach, right? So again, if you find that stress is really holding you back and it's preventing you from succeeding in your current role or the role that you just left, then you may want to reach out to a counselor and figure out some strategies to deal with your stress levels, because chances are when you're in your new role, you may not have the same stressors, but you're going to have different stressors. And so you want to develop the skills to manage that stress. Again, if you have perfectionism or anxiety or trouble with boundaries, these are also areas where a counselor can help you as well. So I would encourage you to make sure that you've got the support you need, right? You're going through a transition. There's going to be a lot of new, there's going to be steep learning curves, and ultimately you want to succeed. And so what we're looking at here are the strategies that will help set you up for the greatest amount of success, right? You're stepping into a new role. It's a fresh start. So let's make sure that you take the most advantage and set yourself up in a way that is strategic and intentional and aligned with what it is that you truly want to do, the work that you want to do, the way you want to do your work, the people you want to work with, the clients you want to serve. Let's take advantage and make sure that we get you on the right track. So just to summarize, you are going to take 100% responsibility. No matter what amazing efforts are being made by the organization that you're joining, you are going to take 100% responsibility for your integration. You're going to focus on making a strong first impression, right? We're going to think of that Head & Shoulders commercial. You never get a second chance to make a first impression. So let's focus on making the best first impression that you can. And yes, that does mean that initially that is going to take extra energy on your part. That's okay, because once you've made those initial impressions, then it will be done, right? It's not going to be at that same level of intensity for the entire time that you're in your new role, but you do want to make that initial investment up front so that you are setting yourself up for success. You're setting yourself up on the right foot. And then third, we want to have a plan, right? A 30, 60, 90-day plan, just a guideline, a checklist. It doesn't have to be something that you follow to a T. It just needs to be enough that you feel intentional and purposeful in the way that you approach your new role. Again, you might look at performance reviews and how they're conducted, what's being measured in order to assess what you want to put on your 30, 60, 90-day plan. And then finally, get the support you need, right? Internally within the organization, externally, mentors, coaches, lawyers that you trust, family members, counselors, all the people that are going to support you in the transition and help you really maximize that opportunity and to create exactly what it is that you want in your practice. Now, the reason this is going to work for you is that when you are proactive, you will set yourself up for success, a successful transition. Now, you will be strategic about the relationships that you build and the work that you seek out. And this is something that applies when you're transitioning from job A to job B. This also applies when you're returning from a mat leave or some other form of leave, right? You've been away from the firm for a while, so you don't have a bunch of files that you're currently active on. It's a fresh start. It's an opportunity for you to be really intentional about what you bring onto your plate. You won't always have control over all of that, but to the extent that you do, you get to be more decisive and guide yourself in the direction that you want. You'll move faster, right? If you have a plan, right, and you are being strategic and you make that lateral move, you'll move faster, because one of the main advantages about moving from firm A to firm B is that firm A is probably where you started out as a junior, or at least you were more junior than you are now. And so you may have set yourself up not with the best first impression, right? People might see you, they might pigeonhole you at a certain level or in a certain role, or they might see you as a baby lawyer. Whereas when you go into a new environment, people don't have the same preconceived notion of who you are and what you're capable of. And so what you might find is that you are able to move further and faster because you're going in with a fresh new impression. People see you at this new level of responsibility. And so you then align yourself to these new expectations. And then finally, you're able to, especially when you're being intentional, you're able to take all of your learnings from your previous roles and distill from them what you want to keep doing, what you want to do more of, which success strategies you've used in the past that you want to keep using in the future. And then you are building from a very intentional place, right? You know how to manage yourself. You know how to set boundaries, or you know where maybe you've had challenges in the past and where there's opportunities for the future. You have learned from maybe having a practice management system that wasn't ideal. You know what you need to change going forward. Maybe you've had some challenges when it's come to the political environment of your firm. And so you know what personality types you want to work with and maybe personality types that you don't want to work with. And you can be strategic about that as well. And chances are you're a little bit more savvy about how to play the game. Now, the skills that you will need when it comes to making your transition is number one, you just need some time, right? A bit of reflection time. Give yourself an afternoon, go to a coffee shop, journal a little bit, just think about what we're talking about in today's podcast episode, and give yourself that time to be intentional. Give yourself that time to plan. Another skill you're going to need is courage, right? You're going to need to summon your courage and your willingness to be the one to make the first move. For someone like me, this is one of the most challenging things about joining a new organization is really putting yourself out there and initiating relationships. Some people will be really easy to go and meet and talk to for the first time. Other people might feel a lot more intimidating. And so you're going to need to really kind of give yourself a pep talk if necessary and form those relationships because it will really be to everyone's benefit in the longer run. It may mean that you're going to need to overcome some of your upper limit problems. So Gay Hendricks is an author. He wrote a book called The Big Leap, and he talks about this upper limit that we all have, right? It's this set point where we reach a certain level of success. And then because we're then venturing into new territory, we almost unconsciously bring ourselves back down to a set point where we feel more comfortable. So when you step into a new role and everyone sees you in this new light and you are matching these fresh expectations and you feel yourself growing and operating at a level that is higher than what you've been accustomed to, you may find that there's a bit of a resistance there, and that is you hitting up against your set point. Now, nothing's gone wrong. This is normal. And what I'd encourage you to do is to think about how you're going to continue growing from that set point instead of engaging in some acts of self-sabotage, usually unconscious, that would bring you down to a lower set point. So that's a challenge that you may need to overcome is moving through your set point. And then finally, the last skill I would invite you to consider is curiosity, right? Curiosity about how things work in your new environment, curiosity about how to integrate, curiosity about how you're going to succeed. And the results that you're going to create, you will effectively hit the ground running. You will be able to integrate and become a member of the team, and ultimately you will succeed in your lateral transition. So thank you for joining me in today's podcast episode. It's been such a delight to share this with you. If you know someone who is going through a lateral transition, I would encourage you to share this episode with them so that they've got a roadmap that they can follow in order to successfully integrate into their new professional home. And of course, for everyone who's listening to this around the time it comes out, I will be sharing information about the trainings that I mentioned on December 6th and December 19th. So stay tuned for that. And if you're interested in joining my group program, that will be starting in January of 2025. So if you are a woman lawyer, you are interested in leadership, and you're looking for a community that can support you, by all means, reach out and let me know. I'll be sharing more information about the program in the weeks to come. So that is what I have for you this week. I very much look forward to reconnecting with you again soon. Thank you for joining me and have a great week. If you enjoyed today's show and don't want to miss an episode, subscribe and follow the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you haven't already, please leave a rating and review. Your feedback will help me create a podcast that's tailored to your needs and goes straight to the heart of what matters to you. For instructions on how to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com/podcast launch. See you next time. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. If you want more information, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com. See you next week.